The story begins with Norman Oppenheimer, a small-time fixer in New York. He's desperate to make a connection to a powerful financier. He discusses a potential deal involving $300 million in debt. Norman tells his nephew, Philip, that he just needs to find the right person to make it happen. Philip mentions he has a contact, but it's not a direct line to the top. He suggests a man named Bill Kavish, who works for the financier. Philip recounts the sad story of Kavish's father, who fell from grace. Despite the risks, Norman is determined to meet Bill Kavish. Philip agrees to give Norman his email but asks not to make it a formal introduction. Philip compares their situation to drowning, trying to stay afloat. But he reminds Norman that he's a good swimmer, still keeping his head above water. Norman ignores the advice for a subtle approach and ambushes Bill Kavish during his morning run. Kavish is annoyed, telling Norman this is his private time. Norman quickly pitches a deal involving an official selling the country's tax credits. Kavish dismisses the idea as unacceptable and asks him to leave. He explains that his job is to keep people like Norman away. Later, Norman explains his strategy: it's not about the deal, but connecting with people. He plans to meet an Israeli official at a conference, just needing to get in the same room. At the conference, a speaker discusses the geopolitical tensions between America, Russia, and China. He advises against relying on luck, like in backgammon. Instead, he says, they should be playing chess. The next speaker is Mika Eshel, an Israeli deputy minister, whom Norman watches intently. Eshel quotes George Bernard Shaw: "Some men see things as they are and say, why? I dream of things that never were and say, why not?" After the event, Norman spots Eshel on the street. He follows him to a high-end men's clothing store. Norman watches as Eshel admires an expensive pair of shoes in the window. Seizing the opportunity, Norman enters the store to make his move. He introduces himself, pretending it's a chance encounter. Eshel explains he is a politician, a deputy minister. Norman compliments him, saying he seems too young to be so world-weary. Eshel replies that he feels better in New York, away from the pressures of home. Norman notes that Eshel is one of the few Israeli politicians who radiates optimism. Eshel jokes that the shoes he might buy will outlast the current government. Norman mentions his late wife used to work for a powerful magnate, Arthur Taub. He invites Eshel to a dinner at Taub's house, a complete fabrication. Norman describes two types of tycoons: the loud ocean liner and the quiet, fast, and sophisticated nuclear submarine, like Arthur Taub. Eshel tries on an expensive coat but says a politician can't wear something so costly. As Eshel prepares to leave with only the shoes, Norman stops him. He insists on buying the shoes for Eshel, calling it a privilege. Eshel is hesitant, saying he cannot accept such a gift. After some persistence, Eshel finally relents and accepts the shoes. Norman offers Eshel a chocolate, but then remembers his own severe nut allergy. He explains that peanuts are particularly dangerous for him. He describes how his throat closes up and he needs an injection to survive. Eshel agrees to the fabricated dinner invitation, telling Norman where he's staying. They exchange business cards, and Eshel gives Norman his private number. Norman immediately calls his nephew to boast about securing a meeting with Taub. However, Eshel's aide calls him back, questioning who this Norman Oppenheimer is. The aide dismisses Norman as harmless but advises Eshel to cancel the dinner. Norman waits outside Taub's residence, but Eshel never shows. He is eventually asked to leave by the security staff. Despite the setback, Norman later brags to his rabbi about attending the exclusive dinner. That night, Eshel calls Norman from his hotel room to apologize for missing the dinner. He expresses genuine gratitude for the gift and the conversation. Eshel compares life to a Ferris wheel. He tells Norman, sometimes you're on top. And sometimes you're at the bottom. He explains that once you've been at the top, you can't settle for anything less. The story jumps forward 3 years. In a stunning political upset, Mika Eshel has been elected Prime Minister of Israel. Norman is ecstatic, realizing he has finally bet on the right horse. At a large reception, Prime Minister Eshel spots Norman in the crowd. He warmly greets him, calling him his good old friend. Eshel publicly introduces Norman as his special advisor in New York. Instantly, Norman is surrounded by people seeking favors and connections. He begins weaving a complex web of promises, connecting various individuals. An aide warns Norman not to speak on behalf of the Prime Minister. He is told that his son's application to Harvard Business School is being considered. During the event, he meets Alex Green, an official from the Israeli consulate. She asks him about his real job. Alex explains her department handles extradition cases for the Ministry of Justice. She notices Norman's constant attempts to connect her with other people. She asks him, "Do I seem lonely to you?" She asks how he knows the Prime Minister so well. Norman simply replies, "I bought him a pair of shoes." He calls them the most expensive shoes in New York, and adds that it was the best investment of his life. Norman's networking leads him to a meeting at his synagogue. Rabbi Blumenthal explains their dire situation: the building is being sold. They need to raise $14 million to save their community. The rabbi tells Norman he has a big surprise for the congregation. Norman tries to call Eschel's office for help but is stonewalled by his aide, Hannah. At the next meeting, Norman makes a stunning announcement. He says an anonymous donor has pledged $7 million, half the required amount. The board is skeptical, asking for the identity of this generous, anonymous person. Privately, Norman tells the rabbi the donor is the reclusive billionaire, Arthur Taub. He claims Taub wants to remain anonymous to avoid other requests for money. He lies, saying the donation was a personal favor to him. Meanwhile, Eschel discusses Norman with his wife, feeling a knot of anxiety. His wife points out that Norman is not his friend, but someone he uses when convenient. She advises him that the right thing to do is not to ask for any more favors. The situation escalates as a formal investigation into the Prime Minister is launched. News reports speculate about Eschel's future, weakened by the scandal. The investigation focuses on a gift from a New York businessman, threatening delicate peace talks. Norman's nephew, Philip, warns him to stay away from the situation. He explains that in Israel, even a simple gift can be seen as a bribe, ending a career. Norman tries to reach out to Alex Green, hoping to find a way to help. He tells her this is a conspiracy to hurt Israel, America, and the peace process. Alex warns him that Eschel's rivals will dig up everything they can on the businessman. She tells him to stay away from the man as if he were a disease. Norman calls Eschel's office again, claiming he has a meeting with the lead investigator. Eschel's chief of staff, Dubin, gets on the phone and furiously berates Norman. He screams at him, "I don't want you meeting with anyone on our behalf." He warns Norman that impersonating a government official is a serious crime. Dubin coldly tells him, "Stop using the Prime Minister's name. He is not your friend." Later, another aide calls Norman with a calculated message. She apologizes for Dubin's tone, manipulating Norman's loyalty. She lies, telling him the anonymous businessman is a known criminal, to discredit him in advance. On the street, Norman runs into Eschel, who seems distressed and unwell. Norman assures him it's a conspiracy to assassinate him politically. He tells Eschel the businessman is a nobody, a parasite who invented the whole story. Despite being warned away, Norman goes to the consulate to meet with Alex Green. He immediately tells her he was instructed not to meet with her. Alex reveals she has spent months investigating him. She says that while everyone knows him, nobody truly knows anything about him. She tells him his relationship with the Prime Minister is illegal and constitutes corruption. She confronts him directly, the anonymous businessman from New York. "That man is you, Norman." She serves him with a subpoena, officially compelling his testimony. She offers him full immunity if he tells the truth about everything that happened. Eschel's team plans their defense, to paint Norman as a criminal and portray the Prime Minister as an innocent victim of a deranged hanger-on. The rabbi, his synagogue deal now dead, confronts a distraught Norman. He asks him why he lied, why he made a promise he couldn't keep. Norman receives one final, secret call from Prime Minister Eschel. Eschel apologizes for what is about to happen. He explains that he will have to say terrible things about Norman in public. He says it's necessary because hundreds of thousands of lives are at stake in the peace process. The enemies of peace are using Norman to get to him, and he cannot let them win. He calls Norman one of history's anonymous heroes, a necessary sacrifice. He tells Norman that when he signs the peace treaty, he will be thinking of him. Eschel asks for forgiveness, and Norman remains silent. Resigned to his fate, Norman makes a final call to Bill Kavish. He gives him an insider tip: the witness against the Prime Minister will never testify. This implies the peace deal will succeed, a valuable piece of financial information. He asks for nothing in return for this final act of connection. Norman sits on a park bench, alone. He calmly opens a box of chocolates he was given earlier. Knowing it contains nuts, he deliberately eats one. The screen blurs as he succumbs to his fatal allergic reaction. In the aftermath, the peace treaty is signed, a historic achievement for Eschel. A news report announces that investor Joe Wilf has made a billion-dollar windfall. He bet big on the peace deal's success, confirming Norman's final tip paid off. If you want a recap of your favorite movies and shows, comment below, and don't forget to subscribe, like, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. See you next time, everyone.